This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
Welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I am your host, Corey Nathan. It is an honor to be a part of the Democracy Group. That's a network of podcasts that examines what's broken in our democracy and how we can work together to fix it. Be sure to join our Patreon and write a review. We have links in the show notes to make it easy to do all of that. It all helps so we can continue having great conversations like the one we're having today with entrepreneur, technologist, business consultant, and my pal, Chip Meyer. How is that? Was that short enough, Chip? Chip gave me constructive feedback to shorten my damn intro. So I tried to do it just for you, buddy.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, you bet. Well, thanks for doing this, man. How you doing?
I'm good. It's been a long day here too. We got kittens yesterday. For our kid, and so we've got a house full of kittens now. 2 of them.
That's fun.
It seems like the house is full. Yeah.
I got one of our dogs is at my patting on my lap. So he's either gonna have an accident in the house before we're done talking, or maybe he just wants to participate in the conversation. But anyway. I thought a good way to start, and this might be our first of many disagreements, or I should say the first place where you're wrong, is to ask when you started developing your political philosophy. Like, were there certain leaders or thinkers that you found in your formative years that you found persuasive, or was it more of like a reaction to what you were seeing? Certain movements that you were seeing, like, oh man, that's just anathema to me. How overall did you begin to develop a set of positions or a political identity?
I was a Reagan baby, and when I say that, I voted for Reagan in '80. So It's not like
you're an old guy.
Yeah, you didn't know that? I'm old. But it's not even that. Voting for him. My parents were very involved in politics. I used to walk the precincts here in Santa Clarita Valley way before Santa Clarita in the 70s. We would do precinct walking where we'd go to door. Politics was a little bit different back then. You would have people that would go door to door on like Flag Day, and they would collect the addresses of anyone showing a flag. And then the assemblyman would send out thank yous for your patriotism as a way to keep in contact. So we would do things like that. We would hand out flyers. We go walk for candidates. My dad ended up being president of the California Republican Assembly. So we were very involved with Republican politics way back when, including then, and that's, when I started becoming, I said I was a Reagan baby, we were involved with the campaigns before the '80 nomination when he won, and of course the election he won. But back in '76 and even before then, with just state politics, because Reagan was so active. I grew up around all of that, and I didn't. Weirdly enough, I rebelled against my dad, but not politically. It was more just that was family stuff. So I was just always around it. But when I started really paying attention to politics and forming my own opinion, I went through a really brief couple of year period where I was listening to talk radio, and I was catching the show from Michael Jackson, who was the first national, political talk show, basically predated Rush. And he had a very eloquent way of laying out things. And, I was being semi-convinced about, hey, machine guns are just not something the average person should have and things like that. And it wasn't until, I started listening to Rush Limbaugh and started really doing my own research more. You know me well enough. I like to know the answer. I don't like to take someone's word for anything in a way. I'm just insatiably curious that way. That I just became a little bit more to the right. Not very much more. I'm, very liberal on most social things.
Liberal
very
or libertarian?
Well, liberal and libertarian. I don't know how to define that stuff. Honestly, it's so weird the way people want to throw everything into a bucket. I'm not against I'm not against the legalization of marijuana, but it causes some side effects and some other social problems. But you're not going to fix that with government regulations. It has to be done some other way.
Just to level set, what I mean by libertarian is more of like the Henry David Thoreau construct of libertarian. That government is best, which governs least. So that's what I'm not. I know connotations come when you throw out the word libertarian. That all of a sudden you're thinking about Nick Fuentes. So that's not what I mean by it. I mean Emerson, Thoreau, the mid 19th century, early philosophy that was developing around that. So that's how I think of you when it comes to most social issues, is like, leave me the hell alone, man. I can figure it out myself.
well, basically, but a lot of political philosophy, is like communism. It works well on paper, but when the rubber hits the road, you still have to be able to implement it. As far as my libertarianism, by what you were just describing, I'm more of a constitutionalist, and I believe the Constitution exists to limit the government's ability to interfere with my life. The purpose of the Constitution is to limit the government. It isn't to limit me, right? That doesn't mean if I'm in a fight with my neighbor that I want to go to duels as a way of fixing the problem. There is a purpose then for law enforcement. There is a purpose for courts. There is a purpose for ways to adjudicate disputes. Whereas, if you're a Heinlein libertarian, and Heinlein would be where I get my libertarian bent from. He's very much, let the people take care of their own problems, keep the government out of it. And while in a book, I enjoy that, as a philosophy, when you try to implement it, neighbors shooting each other just is not a good idea.
Right.
So,
right. So limited but effective government, not limited, but not non-existent government, which makes sense. If you look at just even the First Amendment, there is the right to redress of grievances. So that has to have some sort of mechanism or institutions through which those grievances can be meted out. So I can see that, but also I love the First Amendment, dude. I've become more and more a student of it. But like that balance between the freedom of expression and freedom of religion, balanced out by the Establishment Clause, where the government can't establish a specific state religion, and those two parts of that clause, it's two sides of the same coin, but they're necessary to each other. So I really appreciate that. Speaking of which, are you concerned at all about some of those other freedoms that are articulated in the First Amendment? Freedom of speech, the freedom of the press, the freedom of redress of grievances, for that matter. Are you concerned about either of those? Either with if there was with either party? I know which way you're heavily leaning, but do you have concerns about either party and having those basic freedoms just in the First Amendment under any kind of threat?
Not sure I quite understand your question. What would your concern be, or what would you think my concern would be? I didn't hear a question in there about specifically what in the First Amendment you were wondering what I thought about it.
Well, I have stuff in mind that I'm concerned about that I think is more concrete, but I also hear some buddies of mine that I graduated high school with, or, people I grew up with, other folks that I know from church or where my kids went to the Christian school, that are talking about our freedoms are under attack. And it's very general, and you can't really point to specific policies, that are actual, threats to what the meaning of those freedoms in the First Amendment are. However, I am concerned about concrete ways that Donald Trump has explicitly said that he or some of his close advisors, whether it's Kash Patel or Stephen Miller, said, no, we're just going to arrest journalists and let the legal system's slow enough to where let them catch up with us. It'll be 5 years before they ever catch up with us. We're gonna.
You'll have to send me that quote, because I'm not sure I directly believe that's something Trump. I know. All right, so let me dig into the First Amendment from that. First, when people on the right are saying that their freedoms are under attack, the First Amendment, the part of that I think that they're they're really talking about is, one, obviously their freedom to have their religious views, but more importantly, the freedom of speech to express those views without being censored. You know, when you're getting to a point in time, and it's worse in Europe and Australia than it is in the United States, where the government's starting to crack down on whether you have any right at all to have certain opinions or express them. That's certainly an attack, and it's one that is chilling. And in this country, we should be very worried about it. This whole idea of misinformation is somehow to be banned because it could be harmful is such BS. The idea of censoring somebody just because you don't like their opinions on COVID would be a great example, or on the vaccine, which is an extension of COVID, or on I don't know, Hunter Biden's laptop, or any of the other things where the left pretty much didn't want these things discussed. So their best way of doing it is, you know, shut that down through their use of technology, their control of technology companies. Google's evil. It's just that simple.
Before we move on, I wanted to tell you about something else that's important. Money. Specifically your money. In all seriousness, I wanted to tell you about my advisor and my friend, George Meza. George runs Meza Wealth Management. And with George, it's not just about money. It's about helping us manage our present and plan for our future. And unlike a lot of other firms out there, George and I actually have a relationship. He knows me, he knows my family, and I know his wonderful family. I also know his firm and the incredible team he's put together, from his chief investment officer to some of the other great people in his office, like Jessica, their head of operations, that are always there to help me and with all aspects of our portfolio. You see, the thing is, I got a lot going on. I guess we all got a lot going on, and I don't have the time to watch our investments all day, every day. And even if I did, I don't have the experience and expertise that George's team collectively has. So we get the entire Meza Wealth Management team, all their expertise and all their integrity. And again, it's based on George knowing me personally, knowing my goals, and even the kind of risk that's appropriate for me to take, which, by the way, could change from one season to the next. And they're on top of all of that. So if you want George Meza and Meza Wealth Management to be on your team, just visit their website, mezawealth.com. That's MEZA wealth.com, www.mezawealth.com. And that will also be in our show notes, so you can check that. And now, back to our show. Okay, so I have a lot of objections, but a few questions. One is, how are you defining the left?
Okay, that's a great question. It's a fair question. To me, it's a generic term. It generally refers to Democrats. It generally refers to who you're going to support in the presidential election. It, more than that, is going to refer to who's attacking me and my views and the people that I think agree with me. In other words, who's attacking the right? And by the right, in this case, I'll specifically say then the MAGA Republicans, and before them, they were called MAGA Republicans. They were called the Tea Party. Before that, they were called ultra conservatives and other things. You know, there's a broad spectrum on either side. So, you know, for me, it's a fairly generic term that way, left or right.
Yeah, that's where I think we get into trouble, is when we start to resort to or rely on generalizations like the left or even, you know, I think MAGA Republicans in Congress is one thing. But if I start to get lazy in my talk and say MAGA Republicans or Trump supporters generally, I don't, it's not to say I've never said those things, because usually I'm being very specific. Like I'm talking about Donald Trump specifically in my critiques. Or I'm talking about, you know, MAGA Republicans in the House, you know, the extreme fringe of the Republican caucus in the House. I do try to be specific that way. So a lot of times when I'm in a conversation, it gets tiresome, frankly, because there's a lot of time that has to be spent clearing the brush. Once because I do enter into a lot of these conversations. Once somebody finds out that, I'm not setting up idols of Trump and bowing down every night, then all of a sudden I'm part of the left, and then, I am a Marxist and I am this, and I'm like, listen, dude, reel it back in. I said this yesterday or the day before, a buddy, I still consider, I don't know if he considers me a buddy, but I consider him a buddy. But he started rolling out with these generalities and attacks, linking me to some of the worst excesses, whether they were true or not. Or, he started rolling out with, the BLM protests, and they were awful, and billions of dollars of businesses, and like, hey, dude, why are we talking about this? I was just commenting on the meme that you posted about Walls's, distant cousins in freaking Arkansas. Why are we talking about BLM protests in the summer of 2020? Like, we could talk about an issue, dude, but somehow
Right.
you associated me with and I think you would probably have the same objection that the second somebody sees, your entry on your LinkedIn profile that you're a proud member, a small business member of Tea Party, that they would associate all these terrible things with you, that you must like, assaulting women, or I don't know, all these terrible things that can be associated directly with Trump.
Right. But you're just answering kind of your own question. And I think you dragged me into that. When I said the left in that one, I specifically wasn't trying to include you at all. I'm sorry if you thought that way.
No.
What I was just saying was there is this divide over here in the country. We all know that. We're not going to get around it. You're talking about it.
But do you allow for the fact that it's not binary?
Do I? Well, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Anytime you drill down into anything specific, or more to the point, there's a difference between the socialization and the friendships and the other things than it is when you start applying politics. And this is not, by the way, the most divided the country's been. Obviously, we fought a civil war.
Right.
We've had other assassination attempts. We always have this tendency to pretend that whatever's going on now has never happened before, or it's never been this bad. And I don't really believe that. But the polarization is really bad. And you have to have some way to talk about it. And here's another way to look at it. When you talk about Trump, it's like, oh God, that's going to be a horrible example, but I'll finish it. It's like talking and saying something bad about Jesus and expecting Christians not to take offense. And I'm not comparing Trump to Jesus, and I'm not comparing my support to him as to anything religious or anything else like that. But when you target the leader of a movement, the followers of the movement will take it personally.
Yeah.
Right?
I often have to say that. I often
that.
say, listen, when I'm criticizing Trump, it doesn't mean I'm criticizing you personally. But that's different, because I'm speaking specifically of Trump. Whereas oftentimes I'm in a conversation with somebody who says the left, and they're including this general and by the generalization, thus mischaracterizing the individual that they're having a conversation with, and vilifying it at the same time by those generalizations, mischaracterizations.
Sure. So then the difference is between saying that you oppose Trump and this statement that says Trump supporters are all racists, and you see stuff like that out there. I know that, and I wouldn't be saying that about the left either.
There are racists
and I wasn't
who
trying to really
Trump.
go in there.
There are racists who support Trump, a lot of them, but I wouldn't say that everybody who's going to.
There's racists that support Harris now. I mean, so what are we going to do about that?
Yeah, well, that's why I'm saying it's not binary, because there are racists who support Trump, and I agree with you, because there are anti-Semites who are going to end up
better example,
begrudgingly pulling the lever for Harris. That said, not everybody who pulls the lever for Harris is an anti-Semite, so that's what I object to. That's a specific one because I have family in Israel, but okay. So when it comes to Trump, I had so many. I haven't got to a single question. I asked the first one about your background, how you haven't got to a single question I had in mind. But when it comes to Trump, I have an answer for this. I don't know. Should I give my answer first, or can I let you answer first?
Up to you. It's your show.
What do you think is riding on this election? So it's not the Civil War. There have been other times, but every election is distinct, right? What do you think is riding
Right.
on this election?
Americans' trust in the institution and the process of democracy, I think, really is at stake here. That makes it an important election. There was a lot of questions about whether voter fraud. We all know voter fraud happened. It happens in every election, but whether or not it affected the outcome of the election. In 2016, Democrats claimed that voter fraud affected it and got Donald Trump elected. 2020, the Republicans are claiming the same thing. Those questions have not yet been answered. And so I'm waiting for all that dust to settle and for some of this stuff to finally get adjudicated and get through the process. I still trust the court system when it hits the Supreme Court. I don't really have much faith in the lower courts by and large because they become very heavily political too. But the American population trust in the institution of the government, I think, is very much at stake. The militarization of the government against political enemies, sending Trump to trial in so many different courts for such bullshit sets of charges, and then raiding his house. Those types of things, they're things that happen, in third world dictatorships. That it makes America look, instead of like the leader of the free world, like a banana republic. And if Trump is not elected this time, the DOJ will make all the rest of this go away. Hunter just pleaded guilty to all the tax evasion stuff. I'll make a bet that says that he gets pardoned in about 3 months, give or take. And then that whole thing will go away. All the stuff that was the kind of the FBI, the search of Mar-a-Lago and the problems with that, the fight between the highly partisan National Archivist and Trump, and then Biden approving the raid on Mar-a-Lago, all of that stuff, that all gets swept under. But when it gets swept under, and again, I don't know a better way to say people on the left. So you're going to have to just forgive me. We can't go have that little discussion every single time I say it. You give me a phrase you want me to use instead of people on the left. People that voted for Harris, let's just do it that. Harris voters, all right, don't care if that stuff's swept away. The Republicans do. They will. And they'll have even less faith. And at that point, what do? So the problem with losing faith in the government itself means you become less supportive of all the rest of the roles of government. And that's not a good thing. It's not healthy. So I think that Trump winning this election is healthy for handling some of this infighting that's going on in the country that some people say is going to lead to another civil war. I think that Trump getting elected actually would heal some of that, because some of this really just needs some sunlight. It needs the light of day, right? It really does.
Right. So you covered a lot of ground there. So let me see if I can go through some of these bullet points. One, in terms of faith in our democratic republic, I think a lot of that depends on what you're paying attention to, what narratives are sticking with you, but also maybe even more to the point, what you're pretending doesn't exist or what you're not allowing for the existence of. For example, there's some that we agree upon. We can probably agree. You mentioned voter fraud. I agree that there was some voter fraud that happened. Just as I'm sure you would also agree that there was some voter suppression that happened. But I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we would probably both agree that both voter fraud and voter suppression were de minimis, meaning they did not have an impact or to the degree that that it happened, it would not have had an impact on the actual outcomes of any elections, at least at the federal level and the statewide level. Maybe at the local levels around the country, there's a lot of jurisdictions. However, for the most part, voter fraud and voter suppression are de minimis and do not have an impact on the outcome of elections. But also,
I would disagree on that. And here's the only way to really look at it, in my opinion, is what was the gap? How many votes decided? That's why local elections, as you were just going to make the point on, local elections, voter fraud might not matter. Why? Because you could have a difference of a few hundred votes, and a little voter fraud would change it, right?
I'm up in Castaic, and the most recent guy who got voted on the town council up here, he won with 30 votes, not by 30 votes, but with 30 votes. I can see how you might be able to skew that election one way or the other. So
I had that happen to me. VIA right here in town. The Valley Industrial Association.
Yeah.
I ran for the board of directors once a few years ago, and I lost by one vote on making the board of directors. And the one vote was the one I cast, because I cast, instead of just voting for myself, I actually cast a vote for other board members that I thought would be good board members, and one of them got one more vote than me.
That's funny.
So no, so
you got to put your thumb on the scale, man. That's how it works.
There are states where, like, Georgia and Arizona specifically, where the number of votes that was the difference in the election was close enough that it wouldn't have taken that much voter fraud, and the number of votes that are under question today still being adjudicated in court is greater than the number that was within the margin. So I don't think it's possible to say that it wouldn't have affected the outcome. Whether or not it affected the outcome, we'll find out eventually when all this stuff finishes its adjudication. It hasn't gone there yet.
Okay. So I hopefully I won't sound unkind when I say that these things, when you say these things still need to be adjudicated, it sounds to me like the guys who are predicting the apocalypse, and then every time the date arrives, they change the date. Because listen, there were 60 plus cases between Election Day and January 6th. That some of many of which went to the federal level and were in the courtrooms of judges that Trump himself appointed. A small handful of which actually did go to the Supreme Court. I told you I got to talk to my own our U.S. Representative Mike Garcia yesterday about one in particular, the one that was in Justice Alito's jurisdiction that was unanimously, with no dissent, unanimously dismissed. It was the one that Pennsylvania's Republican legislature brought, and it was dismissed based on the laches doctrine, basically saying this is a frivolous case. The Republican legislature, I've talked about this before, but there were 60 plus cases, dude. And they were all, the only one that went slightly in Trump's favor had to do with the distance at which auditors were allowed to oversee the counting of ballots. Out of 60 plus cases, that was the one ruling in a much bigger case that went Trump's way. And then there were, dozens of cases that continued well on after, the transfer of power. So I don't.
So what you're saying is that there aren't any current court cases that are still looking at this? That's what you're saying?
I believe that there are ongoing investigations. There's ongoing litigation. But to this point, it's all turned up a bag of beans. It's all turned like I'm still waiting for any credible evidence. Even what was that dude? The special counsel based up in Connecticut. Oh, just wait till John. What was his name again? Just wait till his information comes in. Just wait till what was they had like this comedic name to the one in Arizona, the game company that became all of a sudden an investigative body that was looking into fraud in Arizona. And their results came in. It was like you couldn't have written a dumber name if you were writing a comic book about this shit. And it came back. It turns out that they couldn't come up with stuff. Not only that, it came back more in Biden's favor. So everything like that. What I was saying before is we have to. It takes a level of for lack of a better word, cognitive dissonance to pretend that those 60 plus cases didn't happen basically immediately. And then everything that's happened in the 3.5 years since, almost 4 years since, hasn't reaffirmed the fact that it was a secure and fair election, that anything that's come back would not have overturned any state, let alone the election overall. And that included cases that have been argued in many, many jurisdictions with judges that were appointed by Trump himself.
Yeah, so the first sets of cases were almost all tossed before there was any evidentiary hearings. They're all tossed without discovery. So none of that counts to this discussion.
Well,
If there is no
then
discovery,
the ones that were advanced, like the one that Giuliani was representing in Arizona, why wasn't there evidence allowed? Because Giuliani himself said, well, at the end of the day, there's no real evidence. There wasn't any evidence to stand on. He couldn't submit any because there wasn't any.
Okay. We'd almost have to have a sidebar because we could talk on this for a while. I can bring up the current cases going on right now, which I am following, and show you why I believe there's still a chance that one of these is going to pop up and show that the amount of potential fraud was there. I think it's already been presented. I've seen the evidence. I believe the evidence. It's not, this is not me saying fusion is 10 years away, because that's been going on for 60 years, right? Fusion is always 10 years away. This is, I'm waiting for it to be adjudicated to form my final opinion. Right now, I've seen enough though, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm a practical kind of guy. But if there's evidence and the evidence looks practical and looks real, I'm going to wait and see what is going on, because I still believe in the court process. Do I believe there's bad decisions made all the time? Yes. But I believe that when it's finally through the whole process, we have to honor it.
Okay, so that is a big distinction, Chip, where it's one of the reasons that you and I can have these hearty conversations and even disagree passionately on certain issues, honoring the process. Why I think this is important, what I think is at stake in this election, and we've talked about this, it comes down to we know that if Kamala Harris loses the election, which is a distinct possibility, she will concede and she will participate in the peaceful transfer of power. We also know, just as surely as the sun rises in the east, that if Trump loses, he will not concede and he will not participate in the peaceful transfer of power. That's a disqualifier. That's ultimately attacking one of the.
I can't agree with you on either of those 2 points.
You don't think that
right
Kamala...
now the only? Yeah, no, I don't think that she would. I think her staff is already out there building up the set of attorneys to fight every step of the way in case she doesn't, especially if she wins the popular vote but loses in the electoral college.
So let's make a distinction here too, though. So those cases that Trump's campaign brought after Election Day and before January 6th or before January, January 20th, 2021, those cases that were brought, I thought many of them were frivolous. I rolled my eyes at them, but I didn't object to them fundamentally because he had the right to do it. He was going through the processes within our democratic republic that were constitutionally provided for the redress of grievances. That right. As frivolous as I thought they were, he had the right to bring those cases. What I objected to was fomenting the level of public discontent to the point that hundreds, thousands of people ended up. Now, the people that were there at the Stop the Steal rally, they had the right to be there, the freedom of assembly. Again, one of the basic freedoms in the First Amendment. They had the right to be there. As much as, again, I roll my eyes at the very premise of why they were there, they had the right to be there. That's part of what the American experiment. The ones who marched down to the Capitol, that's what I think is at stake. And I think right. Trump has displayed again and again in words and actions and his deeds and on an ongoing basis that not only does he not care about that, he's rooting for it. He's actively rooting for it. Whether you say he fomented it himself or he caused it himself or he instigated himself, maybe that's a debatable point. But the fact that he's rooting for it and that he's not going to participate in the peaceful transfer of power, I don't think that's debatable.
Yeah, I think That's you trying to vilify him because you just don't like him. I think that you're missing. Sure,
I don't
sure.
start. I don't start with I don't like Trump, therefore I'm going to find things to support this theory. Every day, his words, actions, and character give me indicate things that I fundamentally disagree with on a character level, on a moral level, on a strategic, philosophical level.
Fair enough, but on the specific point we were on,
yeah.
All right. I haven't seen words or deeds from Trump indicating anything that you're claiming he's going to be doing on that whole idea of the election fraud. You're acting like this was Trump's idea and Trump's leadership. No, that was from the base. That was from people like me all across the nation that looked at the results. We went into the night, we were winning. We woke up in the morning and we'd lost with these sudden last minute ballot drops in several key states that happened, some of which happened after those states had officially declared that they were not going to be counting votes overnight. That is, you have to admit, that is suspicious. You have to wonder about that.
It's not suspicious if you're paying attention to the process of each state has different processes. It's not one big election. It's 50 separate elections. And
Correct.
We knew into it.
If you have several states that are key states that do the exact same thing with independent processes, that does look suspicious.
No, if you're paying attention to the different states and their processes, Pennsylvania, and now forgive me, I might get some of the details wrong here, but Pennsylvania, just as an example, we know that they are not allowed to pre-process the state legislature. It's a Republican-dominated Senate currently, a Democratic-dominated Assembly. I think that's what they call it there. But it's a split legislature, and they've both brought legislation to say let's pre-process the mail-ins and the early voting, absentee and mail-ins. And they couldn't get it passed. So we know what's going to happen because their process hasn't changed. They're counting day of ballots first, and then they move on to the mail-ins. Now, we knew in advance, because some of us were paying attention to this stuff, we knew in advance Trump was part of his campaign in 2020 was, I hate mail-in ballots, I hate absentee ballots. So he significantly depressed the non-day of ballots. So as an algorithm guy, you knew what was going to happen, that there was going to be a significant percentage, that Biden was going to win those absentee and mail-in ballots by a significant percentage, since those were as part of their process, legislated process, that you knew that the ones that they counted next, the next day after the day of ballots, was going to give him an increase. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's built into their state law.
Yeah, except it hasn't happened in past elections, not the way it did. We're way off, in the weeds almost on this. My point was only that it's not Trump that was leading the question of whether there was voter fraud. It was his base. It was all the people that voted for him. And we were afraid that our votes didn't matter. And that is a legit question coming from a huge, not majority, a huge percentage of the population. So if that being the case, to try to ascribe that to somehow to Trump is wrong. The whole idea that Trump's the leader of the MAGA movement is kind of a misnomer anyway. Yes, he coined the phrase MAGA, but it was the Tea Party before that. And before that, it was the Reagan coalition, right? And I've been part of that from the very beginning through it. I know that movement very well. I was at the Reagan funeral. That was such a beautiful moment. I think I spent 12 to 18 hours in line waiting just to go pay my respects. I have never seen a more polite, unorganized, because no one expected that big a turnout, polite line, people just being friendly, helping each other. Someone would go out and get drinks, bring them back for everyone around them. It was a reminder of how nice American society can be to each other. It was the same way we came together briefly, not long enough after September 11th. If you ever went to any of the Tea Party events, the Tea Party events were like the Reagan rallies. The Tea Party events were the Reagan rally. I said Reagan, the Trump rallies. the Tea Party events. Like I went to Vegas and I watched. It was Andrew Breitbart and Sarah Palin and several other of the Tea Party leaders. I think I waited in line 6 hours on the highway getting into Henderson through the back way in order to go to that event. And such polite crowd, such nice people. You go to a Trump rally, that's what you're going to find. That's the movement. That's the people. And those people got really angry about the election and about what we saw was going on that looked a lot like fraud. And it doesn't help when you put cardboard up on the windows to block anybody from seeing it. And it doesn't help when there's video of someone grabbing boxes underneath their desk and shuffling the same ballots through the scanner multiple times. And it doesn't help when some of this stuff is out there and hasn't been fully adjudicated yet. And you can't pretend that it's not ever going to get through this adjudication process and have a chance. The fact that it's still in court right now means that the court said, all right, there is something there. And I'll bet you a beer that something pops up out of this where you're going to tell me, all right, you're right. There was maybe more voter fraud than we thought. Was it enough? I don't know.
So here's
doesn't matter. That's the point of this election.
Right.
Is I think if Trump loses and it's obvious that he lost, I don't think Trump's going to be your issue. It's going to be what his base does, what the MAGA base does.
Right. But he's certainly not going to help MAGA. So let's put it that way. But here's the thing. At the end of the day, I've gained so much appreciation for the institution of the judicial branch of American democracy. And that includes the Supreme Court. A lot of folks think it's a 6-3 court. We've talked about this before. I don't think it's a 6-3 court. I think it's a 3-3-3 court because I don't think those three justices that were appointed under Trump were really Trump justices. I think they were McConnell justices. That's a whole other conversation. All that to say, listen, if there are still cases being adjudicated, let them go. Let's see how they turn out. I really believe.
Fair enough.
Even in the 4 Trump cases right now, the one in Florida, I am not a fan of that judge. I don't think she has availed herself well, Judge Cannon.
Cannon.
Yeah, Cannon in Florida. That was based on the Mar-a-Lago, the documents case. So I don't think she's availed herself well. I think she's going to be corrected yet again. Was that the 11th Circuit or the 9th Circuit? I forget. But I think that her dismissal of that case is going to be reversed. And there's a 50-50 chance that she'll even be removed as the judge when it gets brought back down to that level.
But
that's
another one I'd bet you a beer on. I don't see that happening. But at that point, that would be interesting to me. If that happens, I'd have to reevaluate a whole bunch of how I was looking at some of those cases, and I do that all the time.
Yeah, but I at the end of the day, like I think maybe we don't necessarily fully agree on this, but I really believe in the judicial branch as an institution. It doesn't always come out the way people want it to. There's certainly Supreme Court cases, the Dobbs decision, for example, that a lot of folks, that has become their single issue that they're voting on now. But if you actually read some of those opinions, some of the ones that came out in this last session, I'm fascinated by the level of thinking that goes on. I'm not a big fan of Thomas. He's really the only one that I think is in a dubious position, and I question. But even Alito, like he's overseen some cases, or it's been referred to him in his jurisdiction, like I mentioned before. But he's my 8th favorite justice, if I could put it that way. But all the other ones. I'm fascinated, even when I disagree with where they end up. But at the federal level, the federal court cases, the appellate courts, I've been fascinated, the ones I've followed closely enough. So all that to say, if the cases that are still open and are still going through the system, let's see how they turn out. And if there is one that would significantly affect one state's results, especially Pennsylvania, not so much Georgia, because that was the election was already done by the time Georgia's results came out. But especially the one in Pennsylvania, then that was historical level of injustice that occurred at the electoral level. So let's cross that bridge when we come to it.
I think both Georgia and Arizona are going to be more of are going to be where the surprise is going to come on this, more than Pennsylvania from your standpoint. I think you're going to be surprised at both Georgia and Arizona once it finally gets.
Oh, you're talking about the 2020 results?
2020 results. Yeah, I'm sorry. You're talking about this year, 2020.
No.
2024.
I'm talking about the 2020 results. But can I encourage you about something? We're not going
Sure.
back. We're not going back. Oh, so okay. So let me ask you about this.
I think to real quick to your Pennsylvania point, I think Pennsylvania is going to be the key in this election.
Oh yeah. How do you think it's that? So I was going to add what I was going to ask you that next. How do you think this campaign and this election is going so far?
Well, Biden dropping out of the race threw a wrench into everything, and when it happened and how it happened meant that I discounted every poll for the last 30 days. I just told everybody none of it matters. Every single thing you're saying right now doesn't matter. That we're past that. We're into September. They don't have enough time, right? You usually have this swing because the polling companies, follow the money. The polling companies go for what their consumer wants to buy, and their consumer is the media, and the media clearly does not want Trump winning. So the polling companies are selling to a customer that wants a different result. The problem is or the good side, I don't know, is they also want to maintain their reputation. So historically, you'll see this swing about a week or two out from an election where the polling suddenly becomes a lot more accurate, and all the stuff beforehand they'll blame on voter changing their mind and the swing of this campaign or whatever. And what's really going on is they're finally starting to align their polling with the actual likely voter outcome. So right now, I don't think any of the polls that have been going on, first place, because like I said, the accuracy, the Biden change was such a huge change to bring Harris in like that, huge change in everybody having to rethink it. Harris went from being the least popular vice president ever to the savior of the Democrat Party in 30 days. I don't think people's minds changed on her at all. I think they're keeping her in the basement as much as possible, like they did with Biden. But I think that eventually everyone is going to sit down and say, all right, do we really see she's presidential material? And I think you're going to see some big swings in the polls starting this month. I think I just saw Nate Silver shows
60%
his projection, 60% for Trump. But that's clearly based on the Electoral College, not on national sentiment.
Right.
That's just the way the National College goes. And that's by and large, that's because of Pennsylvania. Take Pennsylvania out, now Georgia and Arizona become more of an issue. But I think Arizona's at a play. Oh, it's a separate discussion. Arizona, I would throw in with the whole infighting on the Republican right over, basically the last 10, 15 years. And this pre-Trump too. It's the Romney, it's the Romney, the McCain, the family infighting that was, what amounts to be some people call them the country club conservatives. Other people, throw up. I'm dropping the name now. What else they get called? But it's the basic wing of the Republican Party that has been really leading all of the elections. But for the most part, we're more warmongers because they get a lot of money from being associated with various companies that are benefiting from military spending, and also from just their basic, philosophy of no matter what we tell our voters, we're going to agree with the Democrats and spend more money. And that's been the fight ever since really it came out with the Tea Party, and it came out, starting 2008. And that fight continued. And for the most part, the base of the Republican Party kicked them all out over the last few years. They're all out. The Cheneys are now endorsing Harris. Look at that. That tells you not how bad Trump is. That tells you what happened in the Republican Party that said that we don't want your type of politics running our nation because you're not interested in our philosophy. You're just interested in it for yourself. And so you had this entire base. In Texas, it was the Bushes, a little bit of the Cheneys in Texas also, Wyoming, obviously. Utah is going to be vote Republican no matter what. But Arizona, that's why we lost Arizona, I think, was that McCain fight. The McCain wing, as they were getting kicked out, same thing in Texas. I don't think Texas is going to look nearly as purplish as people were trying to claim it was going to be, simply because that fight's now over. The Bush clan is kind of out, and they're all getting, one by one, unelected, either primaried out or just losing the general election. And that fight's over. So I think Arizona is no longer up for grabs. I think it's going to be a pretty solid Republican state coming up.
Yeah. So a lot there again. So number one, that's no way to win elections, by kicking people out that, and it's also when you describe people like Cheney, the Cheneys, I'm assuming you're including the Kinzingers of the world, absolutely, the folks that I follow the most closely, the Dispatch crowd, the Bulwark crowd, a lot of long-time, lifelong conservatives who said, well, we expect, so the way that you put it was that folks like that are pursuing their own interests over and above the interests of the party. So, dude, guys like Kinzinger have no career. Liz Cheney has no career, and she knew what she was getting when she decided to take a principled stance and say he is a threat to the fundamental, the pillars of our democracy. So I don't see and they knew full well. And there's, so many of them, whether it's figures in the media or figures, academic leaders who lead in political philosophy or elected officials, that there's their own self-interest. The second that they say the slightest objection to anything about Trump, the second that they push back against the direction that the party is going, they know that they're basically committing political suicide. So there's nothing in it for them. The other possibility, as opposed to saying that, they're pursuing their own self-interest, I don't think is meritorious. I think is to say they know that they're going to have many policy differences with a Harris-Walz administration. However, they believe that it's fundamental to the pillars of our democracy, that there's a legitimate threat to our democracy, and that's been displayed time and time and time again. So that's I think we have a pretty grave difference on how we're viewing people like Kinzinger and Cheney and Bill Kristol, and go right on down the line of folks that are ultimately supporting Harris-Walz now.
Take that list. Anyone else you want to throw on that list? And they're in it for the money. They are not in it out of principle.
They gave up their careers, though. I mean, Joe Walsh had a nationally syndicated radio show, and he went to essentially zero. What is it? Salem Radio went to him and said, "Dude, you cannot." They didn't say "dude," but they made it explicit. You cannot be objecting to Trump. And he threw away his career.
Let me change the subject for a second to make a point.
All
right. Pick a sport. What's your favorite sport?
Baseball.
Baseball. Okay, great. Okay, Shohei. All right.
Yeah.
Shohei playing for another team against the Dodgers. You don't like Shohei, although most people just say Shohei's an incredible athlete. Whatever. He comes over. He works the Dodgers, and now he's on your team. And whatever animus you had to him before, now he's on your side. You like him, right? All right. Politics is like that. The next point, though, is when Shohei retires, he's still got a career as a broadcaster or invested in the industry. All these people you're describing, even when they're out of office, they're still making money out of their connections. They go on to become lobbyists. They go on to work for the media. Who do you think is funding the Bulwark? Who do you think is funding, Liz Cheney even having a microphone in front of her? People are paying for that, right? Those people are still connected. They're still fighting for their influence. That fight in Texas is still going on. That's what the impeachment of Paxton was in Texas. That was that Bush clan still fighting to have some base of power to keep all of that connections going for them. And it isn't just at that point the candidate, the specific, it's all of the aides that were working for them, all of the family members, all of the influence they had, all the people that donated money that are still expecting them to maintain those friendships that are mad because they're not in power. All that stuff still goes on. That doesn't make them part of the Republican movement and the set of Republican goals. And you could tell that by their positions.
Right.
Okay. None of these people are coming out and agreeing that it's just a bad idea for the United States to be involved in endless wars, or that it's a bad idea that, like, employment numbers, right? The employment numbers show we added 2 million jobs in the last year, all of which went to non-American born workers. We lost 400,000 jobs in the last year to American born workers, right? That's the kind of stuff where the movement wants someone like Trump, doesn't have to be Trump, to go in there and fight for the American worker. And that's important.
Okay, so again, a lot there. I still strongly disagree that people like Steve Hayes and Jonah Goldberg were in it for their own self-interest. They were basically throwing away 25, 30-year careers. Their Fox News posts where they were getting a decent sum to be contributors to Fox News. When it just went too far, the Tucker Carlson documentary, if you want to call it that, they had to step away. It's not like they had other jobs waiting for them. When they stepped away, when Hayes stepped away from the Early Heritage Foundation and his associates that he had up until the day that they were beginning to start the Dispatch. It's not like they had they still had the backing of his associates from the Heritage Foundation.
Which one of those people is currently unemployed?
They had to start from scratch. They had to start from getting one subscriber.
Wow,
then
I
two
wish I
subscribers,
could
then
start.
three subscribers.
I wish I could start from scratch and be this far ahead in that short period of time too. They're still getting funded.
It's been somewhere between 4 and 8 years, depending on which outlet you're talking about. But I mean, I don't buy it that they just, dropped into multi-million-dollar contracts and it was their own self-interests. I know these stories because I've gotten to know these guys doing this program for the last 4 years. I've gotten to know their stories too well that there was sacrifice that had to be made. Some folks made it on principle. It's the opposite of self-interest. Most of the stories that you're describing, it was the opposite of self-interest. And it's the reason that a lot of folks will, behind closed doors, complain and grumble about Trump this, Trump that, but in public have a certain face because they don't want to get the ire of the base and they don't want to lose their House position. They don't want to lose their fundraising ability.
But right there, you're actually just making a major part of my point. It is the base that is everyone's concern.
Okay, so
it is that base,
right?
We're that isn't Trump. That isn't Trump.
No.
The base.
I wouldn't make the argument that Trump, waves a magic wand and everybody follows his lead. Just like I was saying before, I think it's an interplay of institution and democracy. In this case, Trump is the institution, but that's a different conversation. We've already been talking for almost an hour, and we're doing a lot of getting into the weeds. One point that I would want to make, though, is when you're talking, this is going back a couple steps, but when you're talking about polling and media, again, we have to make distinctions. Not all polls are equal. Siena, for example, is not the same as Trafalgar. Fox News polling is not the same as, some rando that's included in Rasmussen's averages. So when
I agree with you to a point, but I'm going to stick with my point that says that every polling company is making money, their way of existing, by selling their results, and the person that is paying them expects to see certain results, and that drives the process. As they get closer, now I know, for instance, as they get closer to election, to finish that, they will try to make the results more accurate to the actual election. Early on, especially the ones funded directly by media companies. There's more push pulling going on. There's more attempt to actually affect voter opinions. That last month, that's why I said I was ignoring all polls last month. There was a whole lot of effort going on to make to prop up Kamala and make her look like she was going to be a reasonable candidate for president, and they can't continue that into this month.
Well, that's what I would say.
Those polls are going to shift.
That's what I would say about the media. I mean, are we going to pretend Fox News and Newsmax and OANN isn't part of the media? I mean, the other, or just if we're looking at bigger picture, if you look up the top 50 political podcasts, it's dominated by, the Tucker Carlsons and the Mark Levins and the Dan Bonginos. That's part of the media, dude. So when folks, complain about the media this, the media that, like, there's plenty of freaking.
But those people are not contracting. They're not contracting polling. I mean, the difference is all of those people, they may be influential, right? Bongino's clearly a lot more influential now than he was a few years ago. How long ago did Rush die? That was, oof.
It was while Trump was still in office, actually. Yeah.
It was still in office. Yeah. Yeah. So, the media in this case is people with enough money to contract with the polls in the first place.
Fox News had enough money to pay $750 million for lies that that some of their hosts perpetuated. So anyway, okay. So one thing I'll say, and then we'll sorry.
All right. So let me just grant. No, that's great. I'll grant you that Fox News can pay for polls. Now, all the rest of those polls are by other companies.
Yeah. So that's a whole other conversation. We could go on, and we'll continue this at Docs, in the coming days.
Sure.
Okay. So one thing I do want to address is, bottom line, dude, what you're describing is expunging those who are not orthodox enough, expunging those, the Cheneys and the people that we've been talking about for the last 10 or so minutes, is no way to win elections. When you're basically disqualifying, kicking out the Jack Kemp wing of the party, when you're disqualifying, kicking out the William F. Buckley wing of the party, that's not expanding the tent. That's basically cultifying it.
See, I disagree with you. I think the Republican Party itself for many years made that the main point to allow us to keep electing those people.
Well, the other way to think about it, you talk about, Ronald Reagan, maybe the Ronald Reagan who was campaigning in 72, you could say that some of his rhetoric would have fit inside of today's Republican Party, but the President Reagan, that there's no place in today's Republican Party for most of what President Reagan represented during his 2 terms.
No, I would strongly disagree with that. Reagan's still my favorite president. Again,
I'm more of a Warren G. Harding fan. He was. No, I'm just kidding.
you keep intermixing the elected officials with the voters as if they're the same thing, right? If we don't elect Cheney to office, or we don't elect a Bush to office, that doesn't mean all those voters go away. Now, some of those voters may get angry, okay? Look at what happened, though, in the Democrat Party. You guys pushed Bernie aside. You pushed Biden aside, right? The Democrats are not afraid or shy of defining what is their party, who's going to represent them. The Republicans just bought that go along to get along, make sure we're the big tent thing. And that just kind of went away. Why? Because we were tired of electing people that campaigned from the right and then voted on the left. All this movement has been about is we're going to elect different people. We didn't kick them out of the party. We primaried them out. We said there's a better representative. It's a representative government. We're electing representatives. All we're saying is we want people that represent us and our interests. And we were worried about some of these people that our interests were not being protected and their own personal interests were.
Okay.
And I can't help but point out, you go into Congress a poor person, you leave a rich person.
Yeah. Matt Lewis has written extensively about that. Um, so do you want to make any predictions either on how the debate's going to go in a few days or big predictions on how the election is going to go?
Yeah, well, I hate predictions, especially about the future. Um, I'm not even paying attention to the debate. Heck, for a little while last week, I thought there wasn't even gonna be a debate. Harris is not going to do well. I don't think. She's she's just not. She's not experienced enough at debates. I don't want to say she's not smart enough. She's just not experienced enough at the debates to really hold her own. They keep trying to change the rules because they know that they're trying to protect her. So I think the debate's not going to go her way. I think the polling, I think Nate Silver's right. I think the polling will come around pretty quickly. I don't think this is going to be that close an election. I really don't.
Interesting.
Pennsylvania, like I said, is going to be key, but Pennsylvania, to me, is going to eventually break for Trump. I think fracking is going to be a bigger deal. I think that energy independence is going to be a bigger deal. I think that the economy is a much bigger deal. People do vote for their wallets, and right now, people are worried, and they're looking at the difference between life under Trump and life under Biden, and they're thinking, yeah, it was actually better then. And COVID screwed a whole lot of things up. But,
Yeah.
you know.
So I think that you're right about Pennsylvania being the swing state. I think that you're not zeroing in on who will actually decide the election if we're just taking Pennsylvania on the right people. Because as I'm guessing that you would agree, a significant majority of the voting of the electorate is locked in. No changing them. But the reason that Pennsylvania is a swing state is because they're actually swing voters, many of whom are disengaged, much more disengaged than we are. So thinking about who they are, there's a few blocks of voters that, Mike Madrid talks about Latino voters. He's also talked about college-educated suburban women voters, as well as amplifying the base of each of the locked in, so Philadelphia and Pittsburgh for Democrats, and the rest of the state for Republicans. So
that's true in every election.
Yeah.
And, to take a step back for a second, this is the way I've been looking at it. And let's not focus on Pennsylvania, just on the election overall. Do you think Donald Trump lost any support among Republicans in the last 4 years?
I do, but I also think that he has a pretty hard floor. That's what's making this a competitive race, is that he has that clearly he has. I mean, we were just talking about Liz Cheney, Adam Kinzinger, Sarah Longwell, Bill Chris. These aren't just anomalies and public figures. They represent huge constituencies of people. So I do think there has been some losses.
I think there's a single person that voted for Liz Cheney in the last election, even though she lost. I don't think there's a single person that voted for her that is not going to vote for Trump.
Not a single one.
Not a single one.
Okay, so I think the Nikki Haley vote is more significant. So Nikki Haley in the primaries was garnering as much as 20%, even after she had dropped out of the race. Now, I'm not saying all of that 20% that voted for Nikki Haley is going to vote for Kamala Harris. I'm saying, though, that if 25% of that, so if 5% or 6%, ultimately.
So you're thinking that there is a group of Republicans that would vote for Harris because they don't like Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, I would disagree, but I would trump you on the count and point out that Trump's definitely going to do better with the Hispanic vote than he did in 2020 and 2016. And he's also going to do better with the black vote than he did in 2020 and 2016.
So I will grant you that at the very least, those are key numbers to watch. What we're currently seeing is that he's garnering 36, 37% Latino support in the polls that I've seen. The last one I saw was specific to North Carolina, but there is some national level. Now, we've seen those numbers actually come down. There's not a ton of polling specifically on Latino voters, but we've seen those numbers start to trend down. If those numbers start to trend below 35% into the low 30s and high 20s, Trump loses his election. If they stay north of 35% in where they are right about now, 36, 37, I'm afraid that you're right, that Trump's going to, at least that, that's a bad number. But yeah, to your point, those are key constituencies
Now,
to watch.
I'm going to layer one more on top of that. The illegal alien problem and how it's hit cities like New York City. I think you're going to be surprised by, there is a group now of voters that would have voted Democrat that are just going to say, hey, enough's enough. Something's got to change. And they will sometimes do that in a presidential election where they won't do it in a local election.
Yeah.
I don't think New York is going to have a Republican mayor or a Republican governor anytime soon. But I could see a group of them saying, hey, some message needs to be sent. And I can definitely see that it's a problem that the rest of the country is seeing in those cities and saying, thank God I don't live, in Chicago or New York City. It's definitely going to be one of the key issues. And I think that's going to be key in voters. That's what they're going to remember.
Okay. So we could do this all day, my friend. So I want to start to wrap it up. This is what's called the TP&R question. What do you think each of us can do to be able to share space with, have better conversations with, perhaps even nurture relationships with people across our differences? So that's people who have different backgrounds and beliefs than we do, get their news from different sources than we do. How can we do better at talking politics and religion without killing each other? Or is it even possible?
It's absolutely possible. Let me share a key concept that I carry with you. And that is, in order for there to be communication, there has to be two things. There has to be mutual respect and a willingness to understand the other person's point of view. You have to have those two things for communication. And they are two separate things. Without mutual respect first, you're not even going to be listening, let alone trying to understand the other person's point of view. And mutual respect allows some people to say, okay, you can say your opinion, but if you're not absorbing that and thinking about it and thinking, what if I was wrong? Then you're not doing yourself a favor, and you're certainly not engaging in communication. All right. So you have to have that. What's going on right now is the whole nation is dividing up and agreeing with their side on everything. And they're just not talking to the other side because there's no mutual respect right off the bat. So for these conversations to go on, the first thing you have to be willing to do is listen to the other person's point of view with an open mind and actually try to think it through. And then you're expecting them to do the same thing. It has to be both ways. If I'm talking to someone and I say that they're just constantly disregarding what I'm talking about, or worse, pretending like I don't know what I'm talking about, to me, that's worse. Why bother talking to them?
Yeah.
That's a conversation. In fact, I'm constantly surprised by people that think they know more than me on a subject because they've just never talked to me about it. And in my head, I'm just going, man, you really need to spend some time researching what you think you know.
Yeah.
So mutual respect and a willingness to understand the other person's point of view.
So before we go, how can folks, if folks want to keep up with you online or just drop you a line and tell you how much you own my ass on this during this conversation, what's the best way for folks find you on the interwebs?
Don't. No, I'm not. I don't really have a much of a social media profile. If they do find me, they're not even going to focus on me. They're going to focus on my wife. No one cares about me. They're going to go start following my wife. My wife will pick up more Instagram followers. As you know, I'm kind of retired out of politics. I don't expect to try to be a public persona at all. I'm not looking for followers. If they want to hear more from me, have them call you and tell you to have me on as a guest again, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
But no,
or just meet us at Doc's Inn one afternoon. Where
there
Brandon
you go.
And I have
That's always fun.
It's always fun, man.
Well, hopefully you're going to have listeners outside of this valley.
Oh, well, yeah, we do. We do.
Okay.
I'm really happy, and it's gratifying to see when I look at our numbers to see, just California it started out as our number one state, but now Texas and New York and Maryland and Florida, and we have listeners literally in every state and around the world. When I look at our numbers and I see countries that I don't even know where they are, it's pretty cool. So yeah, people in Eritrea are going to be listening to you, Chip. How do you like them apples? Dude, this was a ton of fun. I knew it would be. I knew you wouldn't disappoint. I always appreciate talking to you, even though you're wrong on just about everything.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, maybe next time we can hit some semi non-political discussions, more about technology and other things. But if this is all politics and religion, that's all you want to talk about, then I can talk about that all day long.
That's the name of the show, baby. That's the name of the show. Thanks again for doing this, Chip. I really enjoy talking to you.
All right. You're welcome. I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. And as always, if you dig what we're doing here, remember to follow the show, write the review, and join the conversation on Patreon. It's patreon.com/politicsandreligion. Check it out, subscribe, get some swag. Really excited about all of it. Now go talk some politics and religion with gentleness and respect, maybe over a beer or coffee or whatever. Have a great week.